First thing you see when you come into the Teofipol town is this very imposing Eastern Orthodox church with its steeple towers or onion type of domes in Eastern Orthodoxy. We stopped to visit Emma Zahn, the local Jewish community leader, and her father. And we decided to go on and stop at two other towns. And on the way out of Teofipol, I hadn't seen this before in my previous trips, but there were two of these German machine gun bunkers on each side of the road exiting Teofipol, so it was a kind of serendipitous thing. Alex, our guide, happened to notice them, and it's quite impressive to realize that this is left over from almost certainly 1941. And then on to Ketterberg, where many of my Hista relatives' ancestors came from, now called Kaczynivka, because it's much smaller than it was, has now about 160 people in it. Women, children, and the elderly graze the cattle alongside of the roads because the regular farmland is too valuable for grazing. This is a farmer's field in which there is an unmarked mass grave that a few years ago we found a man who was able to direct us to this mass grave site. Many of the Ketterberg Jews were actually shipped to Lanovtsy and were killed during the Holocaust in Lanovtsy, but there was about 360 of them that were killed here and dumped into this mass grave. For the last 60 years, farmers and their farmhands have left their lunch debris here. The Jewish cemetery is on the other side of Kaczynivka. It's quite overgrown, and you see samples of these grave covers that were put there to keep the spirit from rising up out of the ground. The tombstones were often taken by modern Ukrainians as construction material. These stones you're looking at now are smaller because this cemetery had a separate children's section. And then we went on to Kremenets. Kremenets is about approximately 12 miles from Kaczynivka, where there is this huge cemetery. Burials have been going on here since the 16th century. It's on about 8 acres on a slope because farm level land was too valuable for things like cemeteries. And I'm guessing from what I've read and seen that we're probably looking at over a period of 4 centuries of burials here, or 4 centuries plus of burials here. Probably upward of some 3,000 graves. Michael and I decided to walk through the cemetery and up its steep slope. And as we were walking up through the cemetery, I went off to the left and Michael went ahead to the right. And I saw ahead of me a man sitting there, and I couldn't see why, but he was another example of the lack of reverence for these cemeteries. He was grazing his cow. This was probably a replacement plaque done by some of the survivors. Then there is only one of the 7 synagogues that were in Kremenets at one time, one building left, and it's used as a bus station. This is the late 1940s mass grave memorial in Kremenets. Next to it, having been done again in the 1990s, there were 15,000 Jews killed here, so many of the locals said that the soil actually turned red. We left Kremenets and returned to Ternopil for the